Hello, Internet. I'm excited today. We have Wing Commander Preller Geldenhuys back with us. And he flew for the Rhodesian Air Force for many years. He ended up as Wing Commander. He supported the South African forces as well. He's a man who wrote many books. When we spoke the first time, I didn't realize actually how many books he wrote, but I can tell you these books are very good. I will put the links in here. And yes, we expect you to go and buy them. They are good reads, and if you want to know anything about the Rhodesian Air Force operations, the one book he wrote, definitely that is a book. So it's over to you, sir. Welcome with us. Thank you for being here. You're in New Zealand. It's evening there for you. It's morning here in Switzerland. And I'm really grateful to have you with us again. I wonder if you can tell us about squadron life or anything else you wish to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I just like to say I've looked at quite a few of your videos. They're really first class. There's a lot of videos that I hadn't known that you've done, and I realize that you're a bailiff, you're a policeman, and you've got a law degree, so I've got to be careful what I say. Mentioned my grandmother's surname was Preller. So, and I was a second son, and in the old Afrikaans way, the first son got the grandfather's, the paternal father's name, which my elder book, he died in July this year. So he's named after my grandfather. My grandfather died when he was 64 years old, and my father died when he was 56. So I'm ready for about 20 years more than what he's lived. My grandmother wrote about the oorlogsherinneringe van die Boereoorlog. And that sort of motivated me to commit my story in writing. She had a hard time. The Free State fell quite early, and the Boers had to bury their guns and hand in their old weapons. But General de Wet came around to Bothaville, where I was born, and convinced my father that he must take up arms again. And that's what he did. But he followed his father-in-law, R.C.N. Preller, Abram Karl Nordea Preller. And that's where I got my name from. As mentioned, my father, after the war, went up to Zambia, and he retired after 20 years. Then went farming for a year, and I went down to Gwello School, and that's where I met my good lady. I want to say I would like to dedicate this video to my beautiful wife, Rena. She's now 177 days since they put her on palliative care. But my son-in-law, who's a doctor, and my daughter, who's a nurse, convinced us to move from Pyroa up to Bay of Islands. And I actually give them due credit for making Rena survive that long. Air Force life was terrific. It's taken up the majority of my books. I'm doing another book at the moment with the title of Rhodesian Operations in the 60s. I joined the Air Force in 63, got married in 66, a year after UDI. My daughter was born 2 years later in 68, and my son was born in 1970. I think I've covered this already, but just to give a background that I may have missed earlier on. Long story short, my father went bankrupt after a year as a farmer. He moved down to Fort Vic. But he's my hero. It was because of him that I took up flying, and I just want to show a picture of my dad. That's me and my dad on my wedding day. My dad was in uniform, and yeah, it was great to have my dad with me. And I then mentioned after the Air Force, after he was demobbed, he went up to the Copper Belt, and I was about 5 or 6 years old when I had my first flight in a Piper Cub. What I didn't mention earlier on is that after the jet squadrons, I was posted as a mahogany bomber. The timber in Rhodesia was mahogany, and they made furniture for. And so I flew a mahogany bomber, a desk, and was posted as OC admin wing down at Thornhill. When Uric was the station commander, he was a group captain then. And Tol and my life has mixed, quite a lot. We were on the squadrons together. He made me a flight commander when I was on Canberras. I mentioned Randy Durant, who succeeded Tol Uric as OC5 Squadron. We had 12 Squadron come and visit us up at Serum. They were heavily involved with the Rhodesian War as well. They would come up and fly out of Fieldy. Fieldy was a base which the South Africans had built halfway between Salisbury and Thornhill in Gwello. And they also helped build Buffalo Range Airport in the Lowveld. I forgot to mention that as a retread pilot on number 4 Squadron, I also flew Trojans and Lynxes. The Trojan was very similar to the Bosbok in the SAF. Used mainly for FAC, had a big T on the wings, and you would dive down on the target, and the guy would look at the T on the wing, and you'd dive towards the target, and that would mark the target in forward air control for jets. FAC, we also did that on the Lynx aircraft, but it was a fighter in its own right. It was armed with 2 by 303 Brownies on top of the wing. We had about 38 18mm Sneb rockets. We dropped Frantans from it, and they also did a mini Golf, which they could drop from the Lynx. In May 1974, in May I was made OC FAF7 down at Buffalo Range, and my operations book is the cover of FAF7 in the middle of the cover. If you look very carefully at that cover, you'll see a lot of airstrikes that has got a little red stripe underneath a number. all of the ones with a little red stripe are airstrikes that I've done, both in Mozambique, in Rhodesia, a lot along the Zambezi Valley, to the west of Tet in Mozambique. But I noticed that a lot of people would look up the number and find out what their airstrikes was, but that never happened. I may have been amiss because I didn't mention it in the book at all. For people could actually, it's called the UTM grid. There is a page with all the UTM numbers on it, and so you could follow the grid square. And the color photograph in the A4 size book, which was covered with red dots around Mount Darwin. Mount Darwin was to the northeast of Salisbury, and there wasn't space to put another airstrike, and so a lot of those airstrikes weren't plotted accurately because you would have several airstrikes on one camp. But to get the number in, I had to put it just as close as I could. I just want to mention that because in compiling military history, and please get me right, I'm not a historian, I'm not a military writer. Some guys have said to me, you must be a military historian, but I'm not. And after the war, I'm going to just mention in Buffalo Range, I was there for about 4 months as the FAF commander. From after that, I was posted as the OC admin wing. Then later on, I converted back onto the provost, and you became a retread pilot. You were sent out to bush to relieve other guys that they could have their R&R cycles. And it was during one of those relief duties in December 1976 that I was shot twice in the Lynx. Now, the first time I received a round was on Op Nickel, which is what my autobiography was called. And Richard Wood has painted a beautiful picture on my Op Nickel book, where he's shown a provost in the dive. So I've covered Op Nickel in quite a lot of detail, but it was in attacking a Turk camp called Tatanga. I was marking the target for Canberras. The Canberras was flown by one of our number 16 PDC guys, Alistair Bruce. He's passed on, unfortunately, a short while ago. But it was during that target marking that only on landing they told me, "Oh, do you know that your aircraft's been hit?" I said, "No, I don't know about it." But you certainly know when the guys are firing at you. It's like putting your finger in a fan, a fast rotating fan. You have that click, 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 click sound as a fan knocks your finger. And that's what it sounds like in an aircraft when the guys are firing at you. And about a week later, we had a high density operation in the Nyagena TTL. I call it the Battle of Nyagena. And I'd flown about 3 sorties, 3 different strikes on that particular operation. And on the one that I remember particularly, I had the brigadier with me. He was Tol Janneke's boss in Fort Victoria. And this high density operation that they had in the Nigeria, a tribal trust land to the northwest of Buffalo Range, between Buffalo Range and Fort Victoria, the brigadier deployed about 16 or 17 companies of troops. Now, a company is about 120 men. And what happened with the tours would just vacate the camp when there was a high density operation. They would go to ground, and when the operation finished after 10 days or 2 weeks, they would just then move back again and carry on with what they were doing. But it was then thereabouts, and I was flying with this brigadier. I got shot a third time, or rather, the aircraft sustained some hits. So I presume he had to change his underpants. After that 6-hour sortie with me in the aircraft. So I just wanted to cover flying the Trojan and flying the Lynx. Put me back in the front line where I was flying light aircraft. Although my command appointments as flight commanders was on the jet squadrons, was on Hunters in 1970, and then Canberras for about 3 or 4 years. And that's where I got to mix with number 12 squadron. And then just a side issue, during the war years, number 12 squadron SAF was commanded by Bob Preller. Now, Bob Preller was my grandmother's cousin. And my father had sent me a cutting of something about Bob Preller, saying, "Oh, I don't know, you were in Southwest Africa." I said, no, that's not me. But he was pulling my leg. It was just to tell me that it was a story to do with Bob Preller. Air Force life was very good to us. As I mentioned, I got married in 1966. I had my daughter in 2 years later in 1968, and then my son 2 years after that in 1970. Because I suppose, having cared for my daughter, she now feels obligated, and it was wise for us to support her in becoming a nurse, and she married a doctor, that they're now looking after us in our old age. So yeah, I really landed with my bum in the butter. And it's actually Graham, Dr. Graham Jelly. I give him all credit for looking, for nursing Rena back to health. He was the one that saying she was being drugged with palliative care medicines. They had a pump connected that pumped a lot of stuff in her arms, and he schemed to take her off these things. Oh, I just want to mention a cousin of mine, well, not a cousin, but my son's granddaughter goes out with a guy, the Callahan, in Durban. And this last Christmas, they all came to New Zealand, and we had a big hoolie Christmas function. And Callahan actually gave me this very super picture called the Rhodesian Air Force. It's got the crown on it. which makes it quite unique because that was from still the Royal Rhodesian Air Force days. And yeah, so this hangs in my camper van as a very valued memento. There's a couple of operations I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about Operation Miracle. Now, under Operation Miracle, we lost a hunter and a Canberra was shot down. And that was just to the northeast or just to the east of Umtali. Umtali was on the eastern border of the country, and the ground troops was consisted mainly of the Rhodesian Armoured Car Regiment, the Selous Scouts. They had to get into position by transport. It was a short operation, late 1979. I think Ian Smith was trying to strengthen his hand at the Lancaster House talks, and we had to attack a Turk camp which the Canberras had photographed, but a hunter was shot down there, Brian Gordon. That was our first. And well, it's the second hunter we lost. The first hunter was with Al Bruce and myself at Bulawayo. We'd done some fly pass for the Bulawayo Trade Fair, and we were doing timing runs. And on climbing out of Bulawayo back to Gwello, I noticed fuel venting from his aircraft. So I said over the radio to him, "Hey, Al, there's fuel coming out of your aircraft." So I went over to him. We were in battle formation, going back to Gwello. I mentioned to him where the fuel was coming out of the bottom of his aircraft, about halfway along the fuselage. Al Bruce immediately keeled over and diverted back to Bulawayo. But in so doing, he lost all the height when he got onto downwind, and he could then see his fuel just dropping very rapidly. When he was on downwind, just having lowered his undercarriage, the engine stopped operating. And then he sort of shouted out, "Oh, look, my engine has stopped. He's not going to make it." So I said to him, "Good luck." I'd come back and maintain altitude. Al Bruce ejected from the hunter, very low level. I gave the messages to air traffic control where the aircraft was, and Al had landed on a little side street. But the rescue guys, the fire tenders had to cut barbed wires to try and get there. But it took them quite a while to find poor old Al. And that appeared in a flight magazine. Now, Al Bruce died a short while ago, earlier this year. And then coming back to Operation Miracle, I can't think of the guy's name offhand, but Bob Mansa. Bob Mansa had been into Mozambique and had found the hunter. And after finding the hunter, he carried on and later on found the Canberra. He cut up the hunter turbine and a lot of the engines out of Mozambique and brought it back to South Africa. John Mackenzie, who was our range warden at Katanga Range, and he's also now passed on, he decided to make the Operation Miracle Memorial, which we duly made. And I had a beautiful brass hunter which I donated and was mounted on the back of this Operation Miracle. And we had quite a big celebration at the, it was called the Shamwari Club, Shamwari meaning friends in Zulu. And we invited a lot of people. It was my job to notify the South Africans. Kevin Pinky was a Canberra pilot, and he flew with J.J. Stradham. Now, J.J. Stradham, we flew his wife, and I'm just trying to think of, it was a sister. He had a sister that was in London, and told Janneke outbid all bidders for a painting which Craig Bone is an ex-RLI soldier who's become world famous for his paintings. He donated a painting for us to auction. Told Janneke bought the painting. He won the auction, paying something like 25,000 rands for it. And with that money, which came to the Air Force Association, we flew out Stradham's next of kin from London. Anyway, we had a very good reunion. At that time, when the reunion was on the go, Bob Manser went back and found the second Canberra that was shot down, that was due to attack Mapai. Now, Mapai was on the railway line between Fort Victoria and Lorenzo Marks. And at that Op Miracle Memorial that we held for the chaps that were killed, is when he found the Canberra down at Mapai. I want to mention Air Vice Marshal Chris Dams. I think he's passed on now. Chris Dams wrote a foreword to some of my books. And in one of them, he said, the first stories you hear is not always the truth. And I can remember when ComOps released their numbers on figures, the numbers were accurate, but they didn't always release it on the date that the guy was killed. If we had a bad operation where we came off second best, they would have a reserve of numbers of kills, and then they would release quite a large number. And so they released the information. During a SMERSH operation, the South Africans were helping us out on Manyantela. I think the operation was called Operation Manyantela. And that is where Ian Donaldson, who used to be the squadron commander of No. 5 Squadron, he left the squadron and became a newspaperman in the Lowveld or Chereji Triangle. But after a couple of years, that newspaper business didn't work out, and he rejoined the Air Force. And he came back to No. 5 Squadron, and being a squadron commander, he was a flying instructor. So he took over the flying instructing job back in 5 Squadron, whilst I was a flight commander. Now, one day I said to him, hey, Ian, you know, are you happy that I'm your junior now? I'm giving you orders. And he said, no, he's quite happy with his lot in life. You had to step down once you left the Air Force and you rejoined. And so he accepted his lot in life. Anyway, on Operation Manyantela, the attack was on Mapai base. And it was on that operation that, that operation was Operation Uric, not Manyantela, on Operation Uric. That Canberra was a reserve Canberra, and it had a full load of bombs on it. But it also had Rob Warwicker, who was a Selous scout, sitting on a rumble seat in the Canberra, communicating with his forces. But a Puma helicopter with 17 Rhodesian soldiers was shot down. It was the last aircraft in a long line attacking Mapai, and about 5K short of the target was a guy with an RPG-7, and he fired his rocket, and it killed the co-pilot in the Puma helicopter. The Puma helicopter just keeled over straight into the ground, and all 17 members on the force had been killed. Now, the day before, we'd lost a Bell helicopter at Barrajem. Now, Barrajem was halfway between the Rhodesian border and Lorenzo Marques, which is now called Maputo. And that was the breadbasket of Mozambique. And there was a casualty requirement for a helicopter, and Dick Paxton was the pilot of the Bell. He also got an RPG-7 fired at him, sheared off the main rotor. Aircraft keeled over to the left and plunged into the ground, killing the technician, Alec Wesson. So Alec Wesson was killed on Operation Uric. Then about 20, 30 years later, after Bob Manser had found the Manyantela Canberra that was shot down, him and some RLI guys went and found the Puma that was shot down, because the battalion warrant office adjutant at the time was a guy called Rick Melson, and Rick Melson vowed that he would one day go and find out, where these soldiers were buried. I had a list of about 20 odd soldiers or airmen, 20 odd airmen and soldiers that we didn't know where they were buried. So after the war, with this John Katanga Mackenzie, the guy in Swaziland, we arranged to go into Mozambique. I'd made peace with Frelimo, met some of their generals, and was shown through the Maputo Museum and the Maputo archives. They all signed my operations book as a matter of interest. And I believe that book is now quite valuable with all the signatures on it. Anyway, cut long story short, my purpose in joining Rick van Melson and I'm trying to think of the other guy who wrote the Puma 164 story. They the one author has now subsequently also passed on. But Rick was motivated to go and find the graves of the guys that were killed in the Puma, which they duly found. I then joined one in, I forget what year it was, where we were going to take a lot of army guys with us. There was about 6 of us, and go and revisit the dams that the hunters had blown up, the bridges that were destroyed by engineer Charlie Small was killed in that Puma. The day before, when Bell had casevaced an army guy out of Barragem, Charlie Small, who's an engineer, had put in explosives on the dam wall to try and blow that because we were attacking Mapai the next day. But the next day he was killed in the Puma crash. Anyway, from the first visit, I got a lot of the war relics that came back into Rhodesia, and it was my job to call on all the South Africans. And the pilot was a guy called Captain Velleman. Nigel was a co-pilot, I forget his surname at the moment, Nigel Osborne. So I contacted Osborne's family and Velleman's brother. They happened to both be in the in the Durban area. To tell them the story that we've found the aircraft, we found the graves. They are lying in unmarked graves, and the area has got all these beware of bombs and explosives and mines. It's all in Mozambique stuff. But Mrs. Osborne, which was the pilot's mother, was very surprised to know that the troops which they thought were killed in the Bell helicopter was in South African Puma. It was Puma 164 is what the book was called. So I've written quite a big story in Puma 164 afterward, and some of my own involvement on notifying all of the South Africans that were killed on Operation Uric. That operation, I think, was called, its name has escaped me, Black something or other. All right, so that's what I wanted to basically talk about this evening, was having made peace with the people that I killed. I went into the countries to try and find where people were buried, the unmarked graves where they were, and I forget the list. I've written a book on it, but there must have been something like about 20 odd. I know that 38 of my mates were killed. People that I knew personally, they were casualties. I was shot 3 times, or my aircraft was hit 3 times. I didn't sustain any injuries. And that was one of the reasons why I actually started writing books, was actually for my, they're all dedicated to Rena. I was convinced that she would outlive me. I would follow my grandfather and my father, who died up to 20 years before, younger than what I'm now. And bless her soul, I think she's still going to outlive me. Yeah. All right. Have you got any questions, Chris?
Well, so, it's fascinating and such a pleasure to listen to you. I wish to thank you again. I want to tell you that your wife as well as your son-in-law is in our prayers. And we hope that you'll be spared for a long time since, because we need to hear these stories. So this is just fascinating. But I do have a few questions for you. I know Uric is quite well known in South Africa, because I think South African Special Forces were involved in it. And that book, Puma 164, I believe, is quite well known. I didn't know about your role. Always something new from New Zealand, it seems. But may I ask you, sir, do you have like a specific call sign when you become a pilot in the Rhodesian Air Force, or does it change on every operation?
Oh, yeah, no, it changes. Your call signs is dependent upon your status in the squadron. So the boss man was always Alpha, and the second number was the numeral, was the squadron. So if you were one squadron, you would be Alpha, Alpha 1. I was the B flight commander squadron on Hunters. So my call sign was Charlie 1. And then the most Juliet pilot will be the last number in the alphabet. On Canberras, I was the A flight commander, so my call sign there would be Bravo 5. The boss man will be Alpha 5. So yeah, your call sign was donated by your seniority in the rank in the squadron, and the number, the Roman numeral would be the squadron you were on. So if you were flying around and you heard some guy call you, Foxtrot, whatever it is, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, O, he's number 5 in the squadron. Yeah, so that's how the call signs worked. Our numbers were very simple at the moment, originally, but with sanction busting started, they adopted a random numbering of the aircraft.
But now I have to ask you, sir, is it difficult to fly in Rhodesia? Because I've heard there's thunderstorms and there's all sorts of things which can interfere with your aircraft. Is it more difficult there than anywhere else?
No, I just think a lack of navigational aids, if anything. You needed the eyeball. The guy's navigation was spot on. Admittedly, if you were on helicopters, you were flying on the 1 in 50,000 scale maps. You as a jet jock, you would only use 1 in 50 at the target itself, but you normally fly on 1 in a million maps. And how you folded the map as well, there was a special way of folding your map so that you could reel it out in a confined space in the cockpit. If you're flying from Salisbury to Cape Town, for example, that was about a 3-hour sortie, nearly 2,000 odd miles. It'll be like a concertina on your lap. You just keep on flipping over as you went down your track. flying Canberras was super because you had a navigator. He did all the, he gave you your heading and height to fly, and so you, as a pilot, you didn't tell the navigator how to navigate, and the navigator didn't tell you how to fly. So even if you gave a bum landing on now and again, you could see the ocean would you'd make some silly excuse about there was a crosswind or something else.
How hard is it to change an aircraft? So if you're used to flying a Hunter and suddenly you have to fly a Canberra or whatever, how hard is it for a pilot to make that adjustment?
It's like riding a bicycle. Once you master how to keep your balance, the rest is you just got to learn the intricacies of the aircraft itself. I'm told that I'm trying to think of that the VTOL aircraft that was developed in Royal Air Force. It's a P1127 or something like that. I forget the number. But it was a VTOL aircraft. If you've flown Hunters, they tell me it takes about 30 minutes for you to go solo on that VTOL aircraft. When you start flying, that's when it's the longest it takes you to go solo. I think I went solo in about 13 hours or thereabouts. Most pilots will go solo from about 9, 11 odd hours of dual instruction. When you convert after getting your wings, very often you just had the pilot's notes, and you would have to land on the speeds you would have to rotate to get airborne, or your crossing speed depending on weights and temperatures. They were just all basic calculations. Yeah.
The Rhodesian Air Force is known to be innovative. They would use whatever they had to the best of their ability. And even I believe with the new helicopters which you smuggled in because of sanctions, there were no handbooks for these things. You had to learn these things by seat of the pants. Do you think there's any other Air Force in the world who had the same level of expertise in that area of just being innovative all the time, figuring it out?
I don't think I can answer that honestly, but my own feeling, I was obviously biased, that if it wasn't for the South Africans, I don't think we would have lasted very long. But yes, for example, the Provost had a starter cartridge. And what we did for the Provost, I served the Provost for a long time. After sanctions, we had a rope with a hook, and you would prime the engine, put the hook over the propeller, and about 2 guys or 3 guys would pull, and you would hand start it instead of a starter cartridge. You couldn't get the starter cartridges. Same with the Canberras. With the Canberras, we had a big cylinder that it looked like a cartridge with just a lot of cordite in it that blasted and got the turbines rotating when you press the relight button, and it would, by that time some of the chambers would catch the light, and eventually the engine would wind up. But for the Canberras, we started them with compressed bottles. You put on a special cap that the technicians had designed and screwed onto the nose cone. When you were ready to start the engine, you give a thumbs up. The guys would open up the valves and push a lot of compressed air into the chambers, and that'll get the impellers would start turning engine and to start that way. Those are two innovations that I can think of. Peter Boyer, the guy that taught me to fly, he should have been a technician. He designed a lot of bombs and weapons and made mods on aircraft. Our own weapons was developed also through trial and error. Our napalm, which we call Frantan, frangible tanks. We also on the hunters dropped flechettes. Now flechettes was nails put in a canister, and it had a tail on it, but it was 6-inch nails that were sharpened, and those nails would go through a tree about that thick. On the trials that we did. Flares, we tried night attacks with Provis, and I think even the Lynx got a flare dropping role to play, where you could drop flares at night, and we tried night attacks, but that wasn't such a good thing if you were flying a jet aircraft from daylight in the dive, and when you pull out, you're going to pitch black. And that was all set for disorientation. So that wasn't very successful. We didn't have much success with that. The nav aids, we depended on the South Africans. I can remember on Canberras when we had the Doppler fitted, and nowadays with GPS stuff, it's a lot more easier. It's like the airlines. You can sit in your seat and follow the train, the aircraft's route from takeoff to landing. But yeah, I think our techs could brag, rightly so, of maintaining a very high serviceability rate. We used to, our Canberras and Vampires had a Middle East obligation when we were still Royal Rhodesian Air Force. And the Royal Air Force was very surprised at our high serviceability rates. To prove it, we often had to put all the aircraft in the air at one time. And I can remember on Hunters, you know, when we flew Diamond 9s, you had a spare guy that would hang around. We'd lost the first Hunter when Al Bruce ejected, so we were down to 11 aircraft. We lost another Hunter. Also, it had some hydraulics shot out. The guy at least flew back to base, quite close to base, and had to eject because he didn't have enough hydraulic power left over to affect a landing. But yes, I think our technicians deserve all the laurels for keeping our aircraft in airborne. Harold Wilson is on record as saying that the Rhodesians won't last 30 days, you know, won't last a month. They will come and clean us up. And well, I'll forget how many years, you know, we lasted.
Well, you know, so in my circles, it's well known that I was involved with a woman who was a naval aviator. We don't speak about her on the show because the family requested that, and she's passed now. She always said to me before she would step into this aircraft of hers, she would always do a prayer. Is that a natural thing amongst aviators, amongst pilots?
I don't know. It didn't happen to me at all. I often had to rely on the ground guys to get me and come back to earth, you know. Very often you can have emotions catch up with you. I can remember doing, for example, flying Trojans, which was a death trap. The ones we got were supposed to be an American aircraft called Trojan. And we got these sort of Boschbock looking type aircraft, very underpowered. I think they had 260 horsepower, like combing engines in it, and beggars can't be choosers. The Trojan did serve us very well, but we'd lost quite a few. There was, for example, a pilot doing a Casevac out of Shumbi Pools, I think it was, and they had Land Rovers down the runway with their lights on, and there was a night Casevac, and this poor Trojan smacked the last Land Rover who was right on the runway, and the aircraft, and him and his Casevac was killed on this thing. Brian Murdoch, I think, was his name. I myself flew farmers out of Bowley Airstrip. Bowley Airstrip was very long. It was about an 1,800 meter runway, but luckily it was as flat as a pancake. Your biggest obstacle was the local Masasa trees, and although they could go quite big, and I'd landed there in a Trojan. I think it was a Trojan, or may even have, it was a Trojan. And the road that runs from Bowley up to Chipinda Pools was called Landmine Alley. Every now and again there was a landmine that was blown up. And that's what happened was I was sent in there to pick up some landmine casualties. When I got there, these guys, you couldn't talk to them because they were deaf. They had all this dirt impregnated in their faces. And I loaded up my Trojan about to take off when they said, oh, look, there's one more guy. The doc is having to attend to the guy. Can you take one more? And there was, in fact, no room. I said, well, I appreciate the problem, but the guy would have to sit on the floor. And he was a farmer. He just wanted to get out there. He was a very big, stout guy. So I said, okay, loaded him up. But they didn't have enough flares. So the guys would go down the runway, throw petrol on the ground, and when they heard the aircraft coming or with the high revs going, they would put a match to the fuel in the ground. But as I was taking off, these lights were going out at different times. Some guys had lit the fires too soon. Some guys, I presume their matches didn't work or their lighters didn't work. But it was a very hairy takeoff. I eventually ran out of any more single line flared lights and just staggered in the air, waiting for me to plow into the trees at the end of the runway. But luckily I just got airborne. And so the next day I was on a recce, and if the locals were on your side, they would always wave to aircraft in the air. But when you see these guys looking at the ground or trying to ignore you, then you know they are shielding some of the gooks. And this is what happened at this particular village. I was orbiting the village, and these guys were acting very strangely, and I was so upset because the night before I'd Casevac the landmine alley guy out, and I nearly killed everyone on the aircraft. Then I was about to go and stonk this village, and the brown job on the ground had to get me to count to 10. He said, "Hold on, you don't have permission to fire fire any weapons, count to 10, calm your nerves, and just come back and yeah.
How high was the threat from SAMs, from surface-to-air missiles, during
Sorry,
Rhodesian
you're coming
Bush War?
over intermittent.
How great was the threat with SAM missiles during the Rhodesian Bush War? Because I know you lost 2 Viscounts.
Yeah, I think it was a real threat. I remember flying out of Victoria Falls. Every time the civilian airliners came in, we had to get airborne and go and patrol the, sort of near the threshold. The aircraft would come in and land, and likewise when they take off, we would get airborne first, fly around, like, track these aircraft. And at one time I was sent to Vic Falls Airport to go and pick up a SAM 7 that hadn't been fired yet. It was still had grease paper around it, grease on its head. And to load it up, you had to park at the end of the runway and not anywhere near where the civilians could catch sight of you. And I had to fly that up to the special branch in Salisbury. I think the SAM 7s was a real threat. I remember when Ian Donaldson was shot down in Mozambique. Tol Janeke was in a Kivet. I was in a Trojan, I think it was. I may have been in a Lynx. And we were tasked to go and do search and rescue. That's when somebody shouted on the radio, Strela, Strela, Strela. And your action was then to turn immediately into sun, maximum rate turn. If it was a Strela, you're hoping to outturn it. But as soon as they shout Strela, 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 you just try to climb out of their danger envelope and fly at more of a safer altitude. But then, of course, your visibility is restricted because you can't see clearly. But yeah, so I've had a couple of close shaves with SAM 7s. But talking about VPN and Yanni and the other Viscount that was shot down, there is a bit of a controversy thinking that they were outside of the danger zone, outside the safe envelope to be shot down by Strela. And there is a story saying that they think there was a guy on the ground that placed a bomb in the wheel well. So I think that story hasn't really come out fully yet. But it may be just guys stirring the pot and wanting to keep alive the story. I know Tol Janeke was very friendly with one captain that was killed. I don't know if he's got views on it.
Then I have a last question for you, sir. It's from my wife. She's fascinated with languages. Obviously, she has language schools. How many languages do you actually speak? Or do you think you can speak?
Me?
Yes.
About, I would say 15. I can speak Australian. I can speak New Zealand. I can speak South African. About 10 dialects of English, a bit of Sino-Lakonani, a bit of Swahili. I'm obviously, my home language is Afrikaans. That's a problem in New Zealand. And they call me a ya, because we say ya for yes. they tend to say A for yes. So yeah, they soon know that I'm a South African in New Zealand with my accent. Yeah, so now I can only speak about 2 languages, English and Afrikaans.
No, that's good, sir.
And a bit of Funniger law, a bit of Funniger law was the old mine, for Zulus. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter what language you speak, it's still fascinating to me. I must tell you, thank you for this. I want to say, if there's anybody listening here from a foreign army, Air Force, Navy, by which I mean not South African, you're welcome to come and talk to us. And so if a Rhodesian Air Force Association wants to come here, we're more than welcome. If we can give them exposure and perhaps some contributions from the viewers, really, they're most welcome. They can come anytime. Anytime, you're all welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And for me, it's been a great pleasure. And I've really enjoyed your videos. I'd like to wish you all success. And
but this was fascinating. Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed it. I think we're long not done with you. I think we'll have to continue next week too, because you're like you're walking history, sir. That's what you are. I'm sitting here and I think back over the Rhodesian War. We learned everything here. The South Africans have a great debt towards the Rhodesians in terms of training.
I think the South Africans were fairly sharp. Yeah.
And it's a debt that I don't think we can repay because our political masters sadly sold Rhodesia out. I don't think I've ever written a book where I did not say I'm sorry about that. But that's history. That's what happened. And such is life. We have to carry on.
Yeah, and I hear what you say, that there's always a bright spark in your audience that has fought a war at all, that makes outrageous claims, but so be it. You can't win all of them. Yeah.
No, they think because they read something at Wikipedia, they're now experts. And that's what's so fascinating to me, to talk to people like you, because you can't really argue. At the end of the day, the question is, were you there, yes or no? Were you in that aircraft, yes or no? And then the argument stops.
It's like, this, I don't know if you can see this little clock on mine over here. Yeah. This, now, that clock was given to me by Bull Jelly. Now, that's Graham's old man he's kicked a bucket. It was a Christmas present. And yeah, you see, in pride of place, because I don't wear a watch, I tend to look at the sun. Otherwise, yeah, this is my only clock that I can count on.
Well, it's getting late, sir, so I will be leaving you. But if it's possible, perhaps next week again, if you don't mind. I'm sure you still have many stories to tell us.
Yeah, certainly. I'd like to. Yeah, I hope to be a bit more switched on.
No, you're fine, sir. You're great. Yeah. Let me tell you, this is real. That's the difference.
There's a picture.
Now I'm listening.
Yeah, there's a picture I was trying to send you of 5 squadron and 12 squadron together at New Serum. But with 2 squadrons, there were so many people, you can't really differentiate who's who in the zoo. And I thought it was somewhere in my filing cabinet, but I couldn't find it. And I was looking at wanting to send that to you.
Yeah, that would be nice. We can put it in somewhere. We'll put in the books and the links and everything.
I just want to mention this is the shirt that I wear because I can't remember my own name. And I used to, this is the second job I had. I had one job in the Air Force, 20 years, and 20 years with Masonite. Now, Masonite no longer exists. They've had one strike too many, and the Americans closed down or sold out our factory in Escort. So this was my shirt from Masonite. Anyway, I'll say good night, thanks, and just good luck with your series. And I look forward to viewing it. And I hope this interview has gone a bit better with my mouth full of teeth with the last one. I've only got 6.
No, that's fine, sir.
Okay,
You do not believe how many I have. I've got 3 missing here myself. So that's why I never show my teeth. Good night, sir. We will speak again next week. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.